Karl, thank you very much for that truly impressive tour d'horizon through history and the current political situation. I think we're really thankful for that introduction to that topic I'd love to discuss with a really outstanding panel this afternoon. The topic of the panel is the German angst of leadership. If we look at the genesis of the panel, this title was existent for a long time. The title of the conference is the same. We were asking, why does leadership have a positive connotation in the US and such a negative connotation in Germany? But then the panel team, my friends Lena Killet, Liz Heid, and Ronald Platter and I, were encountering the massive reactions and the growing discussion on the German role in Europe. We saw burning flags in Athens. We saw politicians depicting in Nazi uniforms, Karl mentioned that. And we saw a rising discussion how a German role might change Europe. And so we were asking ourselves, should we change the topic? Should we add something to the topic? And finally, we would love to do actually that and reframe it like this. The German angst of leadership or the angst of German leadership. The German angst of leadership or the angst of German leadership. Are those alternative scenarios? Is it a combined scenario, or is it just the angst of some Germans, meaning German individuals, politicians, to exercise their leadership? This should be the topic of our discussion now. And if I look at the panel, it's really impossible to discuss that in whole. We have so many aspects. We have a broad topic. We have history and the historical responsibility. We have the growing German role in economy and in the military side. We have a renationalization in the Euro debate, if we look at the discourse on Europe. We have, on the other hand, the global interconnectedness in the economy, a kind of denationalization in the economy. We have personalities of leaders, which plays a role. This really seems to be impossible to talk about, but we have such outstanding panelists on that podium that I'm sure that we'll try to make the impossible possible in the next hour. Let me introduce the panelists. Next to me, I'm really glad you could join us. There's Antonella Mei-Pochtler. Antonella, you're one of the leading figures of Boston Consulting Group worldwide. I think it's right to say you're kind of legend in the consulting business. You're a partner with BCG since 1990. You're Italian. You work in the Vienna office and all over the world. And I'm pretty sure that you'll give us some interesting insights in how the business world, that is so interconnected, as I pointed out, perceives leadership and especially German role in leadership. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being with us. On my other side, there's Ron Heifetz. You are a physician, you're a cellist, you're a Harvard professor, former professor of mine, and your official title, King Hussein ben Talal, Senior Lecturer in Public Leadership, only gives a hint for what you actually do. You teach a legendary class. I don't know what the official title is. Everyone calls it Heifetz. You wrote a seminal book called Leadership Without Easy Answers, and you consulted pretty extensively the Greek government. I'm sure there were no easy answers for you with that, and I'm happy that you agreed in exploring that with us. Thank you very much for being with us. Next to you, there is Colonel Christian Wilhelm Meyer. You're a colonel in the German army. You're dressed as a civilian today, and we'll later on explain why is that. You have been in the Bundeswehr since 1973. You're teaching public administrations in Speyer for a couple of years. And in 2008, you were commander of the provincial reconstruction team in Kunduz. And you gave on the success of the mission, you gave some critical remarks in a huge article Die Zeit published a couple of months ago. I'm very happy to discuss with you the role German leadership can play in outside areas. Thank you very much for being with us. And finally, there's Tyson Barker. Tyson, you're the director of the Transatlantic Relations at Bertelsmann Foundation in DC. you are tracking rising political leaders in the US and Europe, and might say something about their leadership understanding. You're one of the top 99 global foreign policy leaders under the age of 33, which kind of interesting ranking. And I think you have some valuable insights from an output perspective for us. Thank you for being with us. And finally, I'm glad that Kaiser agreed to join us for this discussion and give some more insights on your perception of leadership. So before we start, let's get interactive. What we did before the conference was conducting a survey among the future participants, among you. We were asking you what your perception of leadership is, and quite a few of you answered our questions, and Liz Hyde will present them, the key results to you.
Thank you to everybody participating. We had 80 participants, and I want to share just 3 major results from the survey. One of the first questions we asked you is whether you think Germany should take a more active leadership role in Germany. And we have the results here. We see that a majority of participants agreed that Germany should take a more active leadership role. And as you can see quite prominently, American citizens and participants of other nationalities were very strong in their support of that, whereas Germans were slightly more hesitant. We then asked participants to tell us their first 3 associations when they hear the words Germany and leadership, to just get a sense of people's gut reactions. We hope you were all honest. We asked you to be honest. And looked at those, comparing Germans to people of other nationalities. We had lots of results. This is really just a sample. Looking at results for Germans, we see that history, as we just discussed and heard Professor Kaiser talk about, is still very much on everybody's minds. Germans mentioned Hitler, Führer, fascism very frequently, but also more recent history of the European integration, the Euro crisis. And quite obviously, Angela Merkel has had quite an impression internationally on Germans as in her international leadership. You see a German quote there, "Am deutschen Wesen soll die Welt genesen," from an 18th century poem, I believe, that more or less says that the world should profit from German character. A very questionable assumption, of course, but I included it because I found it interesting, especially in the role of the Euro crisis, where there is maybe a sort of resurgent belief on the part of Germans that Europe and Greece would do quite well to adopt some of its principles of fiscal austerity, rather. Let's move on to the Americans and people of other citizenships and what they said. What was most striking is that there's a much greater diversity of views. While the past, Germany's past, Nazi past was mentioned quite a lot, there were much more mentions to modern Germany. I'm not sure whether you were just trying to be polite and not offend us, but it's very possible that you have a more diverse view of Germany. What's interesting too, Angela Merkel, very high up there. We see a strong focus on Germany's innovations, a land of ideas. Cars are immediately right up there. And what's interesting too, of course, a personal anecdote, but one participant from Afghanistan mentioning his high school that had been funded by German development funds. I'll leave it at that and love your interpretations, and the whole survey results will be made available.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that. Survey. I'm sure it will influence our debate on the question why Americans and Germans have such a different perspective on how the German role in the future world shall be defined. Ron, you consulted the Greeks during the crisis for a longer period of time, and I read yesterday's International Herald Tribune that printed an op-ed piece by the editor of a Greek daily, of the daily Kathimerini. And he said the following, quote, "I can see the coming of a Weimar period in Greece." this is a time for deadlines, but it's not a time for diktat. Germany should have learned from the way it was treated after World War II. There was pressure to change and reform, but without the humiliation that followed World War I. When I read this quote in an article from an editor of a daily, I thought maybe there is really an angst of German leadership, and I'm asking myself, what did Germany do wrong that those reactions are evoked in Greece?
I was last in Greece from November 4th to the 10th in order to help George Papandreou in his effort to fashion the new government that's now trying to pass the next wave of major measures. And had the opportunity to over the last few years, hear the stories in an intimate way that enabled me to understand the more human dimension of it. When people are in pain, it's not uncommon for them to be angry, particularly if they have some place to cast the blame for the pain that they're in. And the Greeks are in extraordinary pain right now. Unemployment is very, very high. There's a general level of resignation and hopelessness that you see on the streets. Initially, the directions for the pain were not particularly aimed at Germany. 2 years ago, when the austerity measures began, when Papandreou first exposed the level of deficit that had been previously lied about, his popularity was about 80%, and most of the anger was either externalized towards the IMF or toward the banks or toward Wall Street or Goldman Sachs, banks that had hedged, causing the spread between interest rates, German interest rates, which set the benchmark, and the emergingly high Greek interest rates skyrocketing. There was also blame cast internally towards the previous government administration, the previous party, as well as the more traditional kinds of pathological kinds of places where anger tends to be displaced, responsibility tends to be displaced when people are in pain. For example, a lot of people blame the immigrant population. And the operating illusion was, if only we had fewer immigrants on the street claiming public resources, we'd be okay. And when you go through the streets of Athens, you know, on many street corners, you'll see immigrants from various places in Asia and farther eastern Europe trying to clean your windshield or sell flowers. And that sort of xenophobic scapegoating is commonly happens in all countries and in all communities that are in pain, trying to locate the responsibility for the pain. The hardest thing always is to locate the pain to yourself as the source of responsibility. And a major source then of failure in political leadership in Germany, in Greece, in the United States, in France, and in many countries is being able to change the local, domestic political rhetoric from a rhetoric of blame to a rhetoric of responsibility. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So that it's easy for a politician in Germany to gain favor, public support, by finding a simplistic external story for why Germany is being asked to take extraordinary responsibility from a financial point of view to buffer the health of the European Union. And in a similar way, it was extremely difficult, and I think I would say a failure of George Papandreou to get Greeks to own the degree to which they themselves had dug themselves into this hole. And we're going to, and of course, that's a very difficult political task. That's almost a suicide mission for any politician. And we saw Merkel avoid that task. As Professor Kaiser described, German public opinion has lagged, from an economic point of view, devastatingly behind the more expert opinion, which believes that with each quarter of delay, the problem has only gotten worse. And that was certainly also the case within Greece. But I think the fact that Greeks are framing the problem in historical terms of sovereignty and is relatively trivial. They're going to find some way to cast the blame because they're in a lot of pain. And I think for Germans to take it too seriously or too personally would be, to them, a defense reaction. I think the soul-searching Germans need to do is the ways in which they haven't owned that bailing out Greece is really significantly bailing out German banks, and that some of the debt, even in Greece, is debt accumulated by German companies selling to Greeks submarines they don't need, funded by German banks, with, of course, the characteristic, billions of dollars given to, or millions of dollars given to the defense minister in Greece in order to close the contract to buy submarines the Greeks don't need, but the Germans want for their own economic. Now, this is, of course, just a small piece of the larger economic landscape, but it's not pretty. When you scratch the surface of the economic sets of relationships and where the money's going to go and who it's actually bailing out. So for the average German to carry around the simplistic and convenient notion that if only everybody lived like Germans and had the proper German level of discipline, the world would be fine, is just not sufficient to appreciating the ways in which Germany has benefited from being in the Eurozone and is benefiting from the current economic policies, which are enormously generous to Greece, but there is a responsibility to be distributed rather than responsibility to be located only one place or only in another. So I think when people wonder about the angst of German leadership, it's really about German selfishness. And German selfishness is the problem of any country engaging in foreign policy, quote, for its own narrow self-interests. What does that mean in a world of interdependency? What does that mean in a world of collective security or of collective economic prosperity as pioneered, I think, in the world by the Eurozone, the construction of the European Union in the late 40s when it began. That whole notion that of an interdependent world asks then each country to expand its notion of what its self-interest is and the degree to which its self-interest will include the interests of other people. So the critique of German leadership, I think, is actually a critique of how narrowly self-interested Germany is defining its, quote, leadership, rather than solely a question, should it be exerting more or less dominance or power? It's the content of the power. It's the content of the policies that I think people are critiquing, not so much that it's playing a key role. And I think from a psychological point of view, and my initial orientations in my career were in medicine and in psychiatry, I think that the danger in Germany is the deep, deep wound to pride. And the degree, I mean, I was in Germany when the World Cup was hosted a few years ago, and it was inspiring to see Germans proud once again. It was a taboo to be proud of Germany. Now it was, you could be. It was legitimate to begin to be proud. So in this new last few years, just a handful of years, where it begins to be legitimate to be proud once again of being German, can we be proud of Germany without overreaching the extension of, quote, German fiscal discipline as a simplistic archetype of to be then imperialized in other places. And I think that's the danger is in foreign policy is domestic policy. And the latitude for leadership for a head of government is contingent on domestic politics.
Let's pick one of your points out. I think we'll talk about the rhetorics, whether to develop from the rhetorics of blame to rhetorics of responsibility later on. But let me ask Antonella, who's present in many countries and very internationally. Do you experience the German angst of leadership, the angst of German leadership, as an angst of German selfishness, as Ron said?
So first of all, I would say that there is no German angst of leadership. I think it's a stereotype that we are continuing to say. There is a de facto leadership in business and in economic matters, and there is definitely a reluctancy to take positions in military and political matters. So we need to dissect. And there is a de facto leadership, as we heard, also not only in business, but in the environmental matters. So there is this de facto leadership, and this de facto leadership has some collateral effects, and I think that is something that you have been describing. That, if we look at the development in the last 60 years and how Germany has behaved, the German angst of military and political leadership has served Germany very well to become very accepted in business matters. So having a non-colonialist approach to globalization, having a helpful hand, having a process orientation in globalization, having an understanding attitude towards other cultures, that has served Germany very well and is the foundation of an enormous success in economic matters and in business in general and in achieving really productive globalization. And in these last 60 years, another thing has happened, and it is a little bit of and it's difficult to say it here, but perhaps in Harvard Business School they will like to hear it, that there is a little bit of a crowding out of politics by business. And it's not, I think it's not a positive thing, but it is a de facto issue coming from the different speeds.
What do you mean by crowding out?
The fact that die Sau wird durchs Dorf gejagt, from business. I mean, if you look, the financial markets exert pressure on politicians to take decisions. And then, people are telling, the politician is back and the politicians have to decide. But de facto, you are, if you have zero options and you have always to react, you are not in the lead. And so business and the economy has been taking over, the pace of change and has been really becoming the force that puts pressure on politicians. And so there is a de facto shift from an era of politics and to an era of more of economy and business. And in this, and it's like a changing game,
You mean that even the business world has kind of hijacked the public discourse in that matter, that the TINA model, which is prevalent in many political discussions, TINA meaning there is no alternative, that this is the dominant figure when you exert leadership? Let
me come to that later. I think in any case, there has been a little bit of a, as I said, of a crowding out, of a little bit of a hijacking of the discourse, of putting, the critical issues on the tables of the politicians, issues which are coming from the financial sector, from the business, from the economy, and it's always the economy stupid, that you need to to cope with, So this has changed basically the field, So we were playing, let me say, rugby before, now it's football, and in this football game, which is the business game, Germany is one of the best ones. I mean, in these rules of the game, in playing business, there is no one better one. So this de facto leadership comes because Germany is very good in these new rules of the game, of this change of the, in an era of the diktat of the biosphere, as we heard from Jeremy Rifkin this morning, in an era where the economy and the business is prevalent, that is where Germany is particularly good, and we are playing, very much by the rules in this game, and one has to say, Germany has a competitive advantage. So that is what, of course, the rest of the world and the rest of Europe is feeling very strongly, and that is what creates discomfort, because, if you have learned over 60 years to play this game and you are the best ones in this, and the others are not yet the best ones, I think that you feel, you feel discomfort and you would like to change back the rules, but it's not possible. So in this game, what happens is that Germany comes and then, and I'm absolutely with you, Ron, that Germany comes with a little bit of a lack of empathy, let me put it this way, saying, it's all about discipline, and it's all about fiscal discipline, and if you get discipline, that's everything. And that is, of course, not something that, A, can be easily translated, and B, that is the ultimate recipe for resolving all the problems. Because as we know, you always need two things, You need discipline, but that's just the foundation, and you need, creating reinvention. You need engagement.
You need growth.
You need growth, you need engagement, you need, the willingness of people to want to contribute. And if somebody, if it's coming from external, comes always with the erhobenen Zeigefinger and says, you need just to do discipline and everything works well, that is creating a lot of repercussions. So coming to your question, I mean, if you look around and if I look in with the leaders and in the countries that I'm working with them and working pretty much globally, I think that there is this, I think that there is this de facto acceptance of Germany being leading in business matters and in environmental matters, this discomfort with the fact that there is a high capability of Germany to play, to have this competitive advantage, used in their favor. And there is a discomfort with the attitude of, teaching without a lot of empathy of Germany. And I think that is something, by the way, that we absolutely need to cope with. Because if we want to move to a new model of leadership, and I think that we didn't discuss, I mean, we speak about the German Angst of leadership, but we should also discuss about what is the German model of leadership. The German model of leadership, and working mainly, of course, in a German-speaking area, is a very different one from I would say, the traditional American model. The German model of leadership, which has developed in the last 60 years, is more is more driven by beta type of people and not alpha type of people. It's more participative. It's more oriented to reaching out. It's more collaborative. It is definitely much more respective of diversity and of different points of view. And that is a model that I think is much more valuable going forward. So
let's try to see what other people on the podium have experience with that kind of special type of German leadership you describe. Let me turn to a person who had to exercise leadership in a very difficult realm, Mr. Meyer. Maybe we can give an explanation first why you're not in a uniform, although you're colonel of the German army.
First, let me say thank you very much for this invitation, and it's a big honor for me to speak at this distinguished audience.
Can we turn the mic on, please?
Okay.
It's on?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So thank you very much, and it directly leads to the subject of this panel. From the Nazi Germany, we have learned to develop a German concept, military concept of internal leadership. And say it in one sentence, you have not to follow a given order unconsidered. You have to scrutinize it on moral and political values. And on the other side, you have to be a loyal officer. So I make, this is a dilemma.
Yes.
To be a responsible citizen and a loyal officer. So always if I'm wearing uniform, I'm a loyal officer and support my government. And if I'm wearing civil, then I'm a responsible citizen, which is allowed to say what he thinks, with all respects to my government. And let me say, I'm proud to be a soldier, and I support the ISAF mission on moral values, but I criticize the realization of this ISAF mission.
So then, as a citizen and as a critical citizen, what is your experience with the exercise of German leadership in your respective field?
I've discussed this in preparation of this panel with the liaison officers in the headquarters of the army headquarters. And we said, okay, for military, it's no problem integrating. We're working together. It's a political decision on what we get in the armament and so on, but on a military way, we can work together without any. But at least on a political way, there could be, for us, we have discussed it, Germany could be only primus inter pares. And if you speak about leadership, you have make decisions against resistance. And this, I think, will be very hard, accepted by the others. And this is a problem. As primus inter pares, yes, okay, we will do it. But against resistance, what is normally part of the leadership, we didn't like it.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us an example how this special type of leadership was happening during your time in Afghanistan?
Yes. It comes back to our mission, to what I said about our concept of innere Führung. If you make this mission, you have to conditions must be fulfilled. The first condition is the population must follow the new government and have a bright future. Do you really believe that Afghan people have a bright future under a corrupt government? The second precondition is that you have to come to terms with the past, not reconciliation in the first step. Came to the past, because if one killed your family, you cannot say in the next moment, hey, I'm your good friend. Someone has to rise and say, I'm guilty. You can see it at the South Africa Truth Commission, you can see it's Guatemala, you can see it's Rwanda. You may have come to pass with your terms. And the third precondition is that you have a reliable justice. Of a civil war, a time of chaos and injustice, the people needed justice. So these are not military tasks. Only 20% of the Afghan missions are military tasks. 80% are civilian tasks. So, back to our concept, I have to scrutinize the orders. Hey, they sent us to a political, badly prepared mission in a war. And it's my obligation as a senior staff officer to raise my hand and say, hey, something is going wrong. You sent us to war badly prepared, not in military training, in a political task.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this brings,
yes.
but back Germany, only less than 5 senior officers, staff officers. One of the famous is General Rams, rise and said, the realization should be there are some problems. And this makes a little bit problems, my experience in Afghanistan.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we can elaborate on the points further. Tyson, if we look at the survey that Elizabeth has presented, and if we look at discussions, for example, at the Munich Security Summit, when Bob Zelig said Germany shall show more leadership, how do you explain, as an American, the difference between the American perception of Germany's role and the German perception of a potential German role?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that this topic is really prescient and has really struck a chord. And we can see this wherever we look, in any newspaper, in any journal. There's a kind of industrial complex right now that is churning out literature on what German leadership is. We are waiting for another George Kennan to come along and basically assess what German political decision-making is constituted. For the Americans, I think that there's no question, as you saw from the survey, that we would like to see greater German leadership, not just in Europe, but also in the world. And if you want a good Rosetta Stone for how the Obama administration sees the world, all you have to do is look at the state dinners that they've had so far. Each one of them indicates who we see as our primary interlocutor in different regions of the world. And that in Europe is Germany. Now, at that same panel that you just mentioned, the defense minister, de Maizière, was on that panel, and his response to Zelig was, you Americans and you Brits, when you guys say leadership, what you really mean is money. And frankly, that's true. This is, but in a wider sense, resources. Capital of all sorts. Political capital, financial capital, across the board. The type of leadership I think that the US would like to see is the civilian leadership that we saw from Germany in 2007. If you look at a model year of German leadership, this is under Merkel's chancellorship, look at the spring of 2007. It's the year that Germany basically single-handedly redeemed the European project by taking the Constitution Treaty, salvaging it, repackaging it, and issuing it out again, which was then signed in Lisbon, became the Treaty of Lisbon. In the United States, with Europe's relations with the United States, at the US-EU summit in May 2007, she basically single-handedly reconciled the relationship between the US and Germany, which we saw a couple of institutions emerge from that, something that Germany's very good at doing, creating very technical, commercially driven treaties, agreements, accords that actually have very significant political undertones. So from the US-EU summit in 2007, we had the creation of the Transatlantic Economic Council, whose genesis was really reconciliation with the US after the Iraq War. And we had the signing of the Open Skies Agreement. And then the global Germany. Germany in 2007, and whenever I say global Germany, I always think about Germany's relationship to the East. Because if you really think about how Germany is going to approach the world in the next 20 years, it's going to be how it approaches Russia, China, and Japan, and India, its new trading partners. Because as Antonella mentioned, the commercial interests have a leading role to play here. In those years, you saw the Merkel government really balance its commercial interests with the promotion of values in countries like Russia. This isn't the case anymore. This is not the Germany we see today. And just to take a term that I think hints at what you guys have been mentioning and kind of sums it up, I think that the Germany that we see today is a Germany that Hans Kudnani from ECFR and Tony Korn from, he wrote a piece on this in the Small Wars Journal, mentioned. I think the Germany today that we see is a Germany driven by geoeconomic realism. It's a Germany that approaches the world through its commercial interests, but that the driving force of those commercial interests, or the internal logic of its approach to other states, is not necessarily a logic of cooperation, but a logic of conflict. So
let us see whether we get a catalog of criteria for a potential German model of leadership. We have something like that, like empathy, or not an alpha type kind of leadership, the commercial point that you stressed. Karl, let us come back to something in your speech. You quoted Thomas Mann's wish for a European Germany and not a German Europe. And Timothy Garton Ash commented on that. And he said, "Today we experience a variation that only few have foreseen, a European Germany in a German Europe." And he added, "This is the best Germany we ever had." Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that if you define what that means, German Europe. You can't really say that this is a German Europe. I mean, this is not the case. You have some elements where points that the German government wanted to advance have been accepted by others with great, great difficulties, what we're discussing here. The question of stopping what will be and is a major problem of Western society. We cannot live on the future. We have to deal with the problem of that indebtedness. You cannot go forever. One, and two, internal reform. So in that sense, that attempt is very German. The independence of the Bundesbank, which actually was a German idea, which the others accepted for the European Central Bank, that was German, okay, but look what happened to it. The ECB is becoming more and more political, looking at the governments, violating the treaty. And the governments accept it, including the German government. They close their eyes and let the bank do it because it helps Europe and it helps the countries in need. So it's not a German Europe.
Mm-hmm. But maybe we can solve the riddle on the personality. So you work together with many famous politicians. So why is such a lack of empathy, as Ron described it, why is such a thing, Antonella, sorry, by the, why is that so existent among German politicians? What's the rationale behind that?
There is empathy, but it doesn't come across. That's the trouble. Yes. Okay. What are these programs of help but an attempt to assist? The language is restrained. Indeed, the opposite effect is achieved with regard to the recipients. When you go and say, well, here are 100 billion euros, but you have to get rid of corruption, you have to stop, let the rich get away, you have to get the taxes, stop the privileges of the this and that groups and all of that. It doesn't sound very nice. But these are the parts of reforms. And those to whom they're addressed, they don't like it, understandably. They don't like it. And this is a real dilemma, to come back to Ron's point. It's a real dilemma. What looks like selfishness is also an attempt to create the necessary conditions to make the own democratic public accept that the money is, or that the help is actually given.
Absolutely.
So it cannot be totally unconditionally, and this is a very hard exercise.
Yeah, I think the from my work with lots of people in Germany, the classic mistake is that they treat all problems as if they were technical. And can be treated as if they were expert problems, when then you end up in Kabul and you realize these are not technical problems. These are cultural problems, deeply embedded political problems, you know, and the time periods and the kinds of investments required to do that kind of problem solving is different than what you think it's going to take if you distill it into an engineering diagram. So reducing corruption in Greece or Italy, reducing deficit economies. It takes time to regrow economies and to generate fiscal discipline, and the policies required to hold people over time in a process of change. That's fairly profound change. It's not just a matter of passing a few laws.
Oh, of course.
So what Germany, I think, has done that's so problematic, it's not that people want more leadership, it's people want better leadership. And I think your comment that it's adolescent leadership is very good. I mean, because you can say, we'll give you this money, but these are the changes required. That's fine, but over what period of time? How long does it take after Germany was destroyed in the war for it to get back on its feet, for it to develop better judicial systems, for it to develop better legal systems, for it to learn how to, rebuild its economy, even in a culture that had an enormous amount of discipline and creativity and ingenuity to begin with. So those pacing and the wisdom of the sequencing of policy instruments, the patience required, and then the selling of that to the German public, the explaining to the German public that the changes required to share lessons from German economic wisdom more broadly is going to take time, and we need to have patience for other people in the way that people have patience with us. That's been a hard political sell at home. And I think where history rears its head is in why that is a difficult, people's impatience at being proud again. And the only place to put that pride is in the economic miracle, is in the German business machine. And then believing that somehow we figured it out, here are the lessons, A, B, C, D, here's the blueprint, do it. But people's cultures and politics don't change through it, here's the blueprint. That's what, when I consult to consulting companies, Bain and BCG and McKinsey and others, that's the mistake they make too. Absolutely. Most of their consulting projects fail in implementation because they've treated a complex problem in culture change as if it were a technical problem, and here are the set of slides, and I think that's the failure of leadership in the sense of holding people through a sustained period of change that has deep cultural implications, and where corruption's not just a matter of paying off a defense minister here and there. It's an endemic set of loyalties that go all down to the village level, and the reformation of that culture it requires a set of policies and a generosity of spirit.
Well, on the one hand, we try to add something to the catalog of criteria, how an ideal model of German leadership might be. You would add the point that it should not treat problems as technical problems and offer technical solutions. But another issue is the feeling Germans have when they are asked to exercise leadership. To stay with Timothy Garton Ash, he says the Germans feel uncomfortable because other people don't like when they lead, but they also do not like when they don't lead, the Germans. So
it's all about content. I don't believe it. I think it's bull. She's right. It's about content. When you're passing out, when you're giving people money, they never say, stop, I don't like your leadership. People say thanks for money. When people say, what people don't like is when they don't like the content of the message, they'll critique the style. Don't get distracted by the critiques of style. What people want to see is wise, generous, community building work that's not going to sink an economy because you're not doing it the way we're told you to. That it's going to help people get out of the quagmires they're in the same way that people help Germany get out of its.
Karl.
Could I add one point which strikes me as making the problem so much more difficult? You have to distinguish between the government and what the tabloids and the public do. When a Greek reader of the Greek papers reads what the German tabloids say, of course, you run into this question of humiliation, of enormous awareness of cultural differences, of selfishness. It's not the government. The Bild-Zeitung is very different from what Angela Merkel says, although she also was not very careful in some of her language when she observed that these people down there in the south, they are on holiday all the time, more than we, in that which is not true. Still, there is this difference.
You don't really want the whole world to have the German character, do you? I mean, where would the Germans go for vacation? It's ridiculous. Exactly. You want the world to have multiple colors and cultures.
Okay, Antonella.
Yeah, I mean, on reflection, I think that I would like to come back, on the how do we need to evolve really the model of leadership to be really raised to the challenge of becoming real leaders.
Yes.
I think that is what we should discuss, because I think that we have some elements, and we have discussed it. I think that what Germans are very good at, it's management. It's not leadership. I mean, it's really managing things, getting things done. It's really the technocratic solution to the problem. I think that's very important. It's very useful, but it's not sufficient. And I think that what you are addressing is, I mean, it's two things, you know. One thing is creating the engagement, really the deep engagement, the deep emotional engagement of people to go for a change. And I think that if we think at the changes that need to take place in Europe, and I think that we should then discuss also content. It's not, I mean, the debt problem is a consequence. It's not, it's a consequence of competitiveness. If you want to change competitiveness, it's about, creating the prerequisite for an economy to really work creatively, to work with creative disruption and to get really new services and new ideas. So I think, just coming and say, you need to fix the debt, you need to have fiscal discipline, austerity is the answer. It's not solving anything. You have the austerity, but you have not created anything. So I think, let us first understand that we need to really have, to raise to the leadership challenge, we first of all need to add something to the model, to the German model of leadership. So we have the very good basis of the technocratic approach, the fact-based, the analytical-based, the in general process-oriented way of leading. I think that is all things that the German leaders are very good at. But you need to add two things, you know. Making sure that you engage people, that you talk to the heart, and that you have the people participate actively in in what needs to be solved. And secondly, it's communication. And there, I think that there is a disadvantage of, if you look at German leaders, they are by far not as good communicators compared to the leaders that you find, that are trained in really talking to people and talking to the heart of people. And it was very interesting. I found it really amazing, the little film that we saw yesterday on the military. I found it quite and even though, we see this highly emotional American film. So the first thing that we do when we look at it as, I would say, Europeans or in German trained people, I'm Italian, but I'm very Germanic in training, is, first you like it, because it's, it's moving and the music and so on. And then immediately you have these breaks, these internal breaks. This is getting too emotional. Just shut down, shut down, shut down. It's starting to touch me. We need to close down. Let us, close down so that it doesn't, move me. So we have immediately, and that has probably to do with the very romantic basic orientation of Germans, that we are very concerned that it might really, address the deep feelings, which are very deep, and might move us in a direction that is dangerous. And I think that is something that leaders, German leaders, need still to manage, because they are very concerned to become manipulative. And so there is this lack of addressing, the emotional part, and I think that is something that we need to factor in much more in our leadership model, and I'm sure that Ron can say much more to it in also the comparison with other cultures.
Let me ask Mr. Meyer on that, but whether this might be a suitable model, not just for the huge politicians who give speeches from the podium, but also for you in your situation on the ground when you worked and had to try to engage people, participate people. Did that work?
One, leadership means also to be authentic. You cannot preach mineral water and drinking champagne. Nobody will follow you. And the question is, have we in Germany role models on a politician? I must say, very few. Leadership means also you make mistakes. This does not mean that you are incompetent, or that you are a bad leader. But leadership means also you have was more than 20 years in commanding positions and instructing. I have made a lot of mistakes, but I have learned to cover, not to cover these mistakes. To cover these mistakes is hey, you have to deal with your mistakes. Yeah. And if I look around in this debate in Germany, have we really authentic leader? our chancellor, former chancellor, Helmut Kohl, did a very great job in reunification in Germany, a historical political success. But he did accept non-resisted donation for his party. And this is from Germany an immoral act. And by this, he became a persona non grata. He is no longer more a role model. And think in other countries today to take non-registered donation, not black money, non-registered donation for his party, it would be okay, nothing, no problem. In Germany, it is a really big problem because we have a more expectation after our experience of Nazi Germany on the attitude of our moral attitude of our politicians. And we want to see that they are really on a high level. And at least we have only what I always call, we have something like an emperor. This is Helmut Schmidt. But he's a little bit too old. But at least we have no really, at the moment, which we can say, okay, this is a role model for us.
Let us try to link some of the aspects of the discussion to the truly impressive speech Peter Frey gave last night. So I'm sure many of you heard that. Antonella, if Antonella talks about the power of engagement and calls for some pathos and pathetic rhetoric, it seems to contradict the analysis of Peter Frey that he said the power of modesty is extremely valuable for Germany. So it was one of the assets of the German success. So Tyson, if you would consult us in developing the German leadership model, would you go with the modest way or would you go with the more engaged, pathetic way?
I think this is really a question of sein und soll, basically. You know, what he described is how it is. That's the German, what now exists in Germany. I mean, Merkel is a great example. She's a modest leader. On the weekends, from what I've read, you know, she goes shopping at the local supermarket. But the type of leadership that is laden with kind of emotional resonance, which is something that doesn't exist in Germany, is maybe a goal to be aspired to. This isn't something that exists. One of the points that I think really touches on the adolescence that Professor Kaiser mentioned earlier that you kind of touched on tangentially is how Germany is perceived outside of Germany. And that Germans, or the German political classes and German public in general, really look to this and wear it with some degree of burden. I think that's a sign of this thin skin is a sign of adolescence in global leadership. With the kind of more evangelizing powers, the colonial legacy powers, even the United States, we have a long history of anti-Americanism throughout the world. And that doesn't necessarily affect our decision-making in the same way that it would in Germany.
Right.
And I think some of these questions really come down to a difference of what is the interior logic of the country's polity, basically. Is it history or is it ideals? I think in the case of the United States, in the case of Great Britain, in the case of France, it's ideals. And because of this, there's this universalizing mission. This is why, for example, we would support humanitarian intervention in Libya. Whereas for Germany, a country where its spine, its philosophical spine is based in history, they say, well, this isn't really something that concerns us. And some people have said that this is a decision that was made, absent-mindedly, but it's a reflex that is deeply embedded in the German, political consciousness. It's reflected in public opinion, and
just Manuel, just wanted to come back to the modesty. I think that it's not a continuum. Modesty and talking to the emotional needs is not. You can be very modest, and I think that is I think the model that we need to develop. I think we speak a lot about Germany leading from the back. I think Germany should lead from the middle, which is, I think, is something very different. Leading from the middle means, really, making sure that you orchestrate the dialogue, that you
Yes.
take people in, that you are inclusive in finding the solutions, And that is something that Germany can do very well. But you need also not always to have the erhobene Zeigefinger, the famous one, saying, you need to first accept our model if you want to have a seat at the table. That is not the right thing. You need to be inclusive, accepting different models, complementary models that we see are emerging in the world and might be also successful, because the Nordic model, because we're always speaking about the top performance of Germany, as a country. But if you look at Nordic countries, they have a very different model.
Yes.
And they are very successful. I would say they are significantly, if you look at some economic data, they are stronger than the Germans one. So I think that we can learn a lot, building on what we have, but we need to, we need to evolve the approach.
Well, on the one hand, we see the problems a certain hesitancy brings with it. On the other hand, we see the pressure from outside to exercise more leadership. On the third hand, we have the huge normative question that Karl addressed in his speech. So isn't it good, Karl, to have some hesitance, to have some angst of leadership, not to exercise this? Why should we exercise leadership?
There are some areas where one should. I find, for example, the reluctance, the abstention on Libya, most deplorable. Most deplorable. They should have joined the others, because this was a matter of helping people, of stopping a pending genocide. It was absent there. So, in that case, it would have been desirable. In other case, I think in the field of security, in general, I think a certain reluctance is wise. Yes.
What do you think on that? Is it good? Your concept centers on a lot of values. You mentioned. Isn't it good to be reluctant in certain things?
I don't think leadership's about dominance. I think leadership's about solving real problems. Yeah. So one can mobilize people to solve real problems from the back, from the middle, or from in front if you happen to be the dominant player from a resource or point of view, or politically. But the real mark of leadership, from my mind, are you making progress on very difficult collective problems. And the challenge of German leadership is, with the particular opportunities it has currently at its, on its plate, currently on the table, what can it do to mobilize more effectively collective progress on the collective problems facing Europe and facing the economy? That's what's most urgently on the table. And already, what lessons can we learn from the last 2 years in which there have been, I think, Germans need to be engaged in, as should everyone else, soul-searching to capture lessons on what failures have been made in not the strategy of mobilizing people, but the content of thinking. When Papandreou went to Merkel 2 years ago and said, here's the problem, our deficits are huge, her response was like a East German, nuclear engineer, and with a sort of simple mind, well, get your house in order, with no really appreciation for what it's going to take to get your house in order, that austerity means nothing without growth. How do you generate growth and austerity and discipline all at the same time? How do you make that politically feasible in another country? And what's our role in helping make that happen? So that way of thinking about leadership as collective problem solving on collective problems that are not just analytical problems.
And not coming always with a fixed answer.
Yes.
Believing that as a leader you have the best answer is one of the biggest mistakes of leadership.
And that's why
because
the arrogance,
you don't have the best answer. I mean, the answers need to emerge from the best people.
Yeah. Karl talked about the adolescence of a leader. Peter Frey last night talked about that, said that pragmatism is not a matter of angst, but a matter of changed identity. Question is, what comes after adolescence? What comes when the identity not just has changed and is still changing, which probably is a place?
Adulthood, where one has learned more. And,
Experience.
Yes, and experience. And Germany has to learn.
Yeah, and opportunities like this to debrief
Precisely.
the failures of that have capture lessons.
These discussions take place at the moment. And one reviews the German behavior and the behavior of the others. One becomes more aware of the shortcomings. And Tyson's example of Angela Merkel sort of basically salvaging the treaty discussions by making a real effort to involve everybody is a very good example.
Yes.
Let us integrate, when we develop our catalog and our examine our experiences, let us integrate your opinions and your questions on that. So we have a mic, which will be on the way. There's the first gentleman. Let me ask you to first briefly introduce yourself, to be brief in your question, and this is the first person over there in the middle. And third rule, and extremely important, please end your question with a question mark. So the first one is you.
Thank you. Bernd Jansen is my name. I'm a private consultant. From my experience, it's very important to apply leadership in practicing that the one you want to help, you want to consult with, doesn't lose their face. So, and a lot of things need to be done one-on-one, at least not in public debates. And this is what I see currently ongoing, for example, with Greece and all the debate about it. So what's your view? What can be done in order to make it more practical, this type of assistance, this type of aid?
I think we'll collect a couple of answers and then give it back to the podium. So the first one, second one is over there, and then in the second row.
Hi, I would like to thank our panel here. It was very nice.
Name?
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Yannis Varsaris. I am a student here in Kennedy School. I would like to, before I go my question, 2 comments about the burning flag in Greece, because I'm from Greece. Those people that they burn the flag, they burn also 3 of the most beautiful monuments in Athens. And I hope they are arrested now. 64 of them are in jail. Let's see. The other comment is that I don't believe there is people in any country in the world that they accept to be misleaded and accused in public. And I refer to our previous prime minister and to other foreign leaders. So my question is, why, since Germany knew the incapability of the politicians in Greece, why they did not go with implementing, with the rules of implementing the policy, not just dumping the money, because that's what I believe is happening right now, rules of implementing and giving a vision to the Greek people so they see the real benefits and not just the austerity measures.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the second row, please.
Thank you very much. Jan Techo from Carnegie Europe in Brussels. I must say that I'm slightly disappointed by what came out of this panel so far, because there was an enormous amount of stereotyping going on, an enormous amount of a comical depiction, I think, of the Germans of the good old kind that I find actually slightly embarrassing myself as a German. And I don't think, I don't see any of the kind of character traits predominant that you've mentioned here.
What's your example? Can you give an example on that?
Well,
What do you
I
mean?
mean, the technocratic kind of approach, the very, everything is just a matter of technicalities. That's not how I perceive Germans. That's not how, no empathy, these kinds of things. I find that, that's so simplistic. And so, beyond the truth, I think that doesn't lead us anywhere. And this leads to my question. Part of the problem seems to me here that, and you asked the question, the moderator and Karl Kaiser kind of replied to it, as if Germany still has an option to lead or not to lead. That's clearly not an option anymore. The Germans will lead even if they decide not to. Any decision or non-decision is leadership, because they're big, they're in the middle of Europe, they have a geopolitical position, they have an economic strength. No matter what they do, they lead. They are not aware of this. They need assistance in this. They need to embrace it. They need to find out what it means to act responsible, not only for themselves, but for others. And I would like to ask the people on this panel, how can we actually, help the Germans embrace that kind of responsibility, which seems to me at the core of the leadership question. And the profound problem that I have with German political leadership is the absence of responsibility for others. It's a very self-obsessed kind of debate in Germany. It's a very inward-looking debate, which has partially to do with history, partially with reunification, and partially with all kinds of other complexes. Now, how do we get out of that mode? How do we develop a sense of responsibility for others? And I have not heard any answer to this question. Instead, I've heard stereotypes, and that I find, slightly disappointing.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's an extremely important point. And because of some of the things you call stereotypes were mentioned several times on the podium. So maybe we can start with this one. We have the question for the practicality. We have the question of the vision, how to implement the vision, and the question on how to deal with the absence of responsibility, as you called that, and maybe the differences in the perception of what German leadership really is. Karl, you want to start with that?
Now I have to return your approach. You have quite a stereotype too. There is no absence of responsibility. That goes too far. Throughout the post-war period, there has been a considerable transfer from Germany to others. The European Union is partially a transfer union in which Germany, of course, although it has a great advantage, pays to the others. It is not that absent. I am really struck by the disparity between what some government figures would like to do, the public discourse on it, which is sometimes terrible, the Bild-Zeitung, the outside reaction, and somehow the German government doesn't manage that properly. There is willingness. The German parliament voted 130 billion fund.
Yeah.
There's a major transfer.
Yeah.
It is not easy, and the German voters, some of them don't like it because only some of them understand that it is to their advantage. So stereotyping, I'm sorry, that's also a stereotype. So there is something going on. How can we help the German government? By debating it. There's a public discourse in the West at the moment on the whole matter. What else can one do? And inside Germany, there's quite a discussion on the matter. There are lots of people who say exactly what we have said here, and you find it in the German newspapers. And let's not forget, the pressure of the financial market is something awful. And the pressure under which the decision makers are don't make it easier. And then they always have to watch. There's a coalition, there's the Constitutional Court, there are the other partners. Not easy. So.
And I have to say, I'm a little, I really feel that it is a total wrong depiction to say that Germany doesn't act responsibly. Neither does, I think that Germany is acting highly responsibly as a country and has been, you just mentioned the transfers that have taken place, but also the tacit acceptance, as you mentioned at the beginning, of a different role of the European Central Bank. I think that is only possible with the support of Germany because Germany is the prime financing unit, so there is a strong support to find collective solutions. Are they the right solutions? We discussed before, we don't have all the solutions on the plate. The solutions are very difficult to be found, and we cannot expect that the leader, in this case Germany, can have all the answers to the questions at hand. That's not going to take place. Like in any other things, there is not the leader is not the most clever person in the room. That's not the definition of a leader. The leader is the one who fosters the right dialogue and the coming up of the right solution. So I think that neither as a country is Germany not acting responsibly, nor do the German companies, act irresponsibly. The German companies act highly responsibly. Now, if we look at the behavior throughout what led to the crisis, what you mentioned before, the fact of some forced landing, whatever. There are always two parts in it, You need to sell the submarines, but you have also to buy the submarines. So I think that is, this is a responsibility from both sides. So I would say, I don't think that Germany is not responsible, and I think that, saying that Germany is, that there is there is strong technical capabilities and technocratic management style in Germany, I think that is, I think, might be a stereotype, but it's also very much a truth. And it's the management style that is now the active style. In Greece, in Italy, we have everywhere in Spain, we have everywhere technocrats. So I think why? Because when you don't have solutions, you need people, who at least are able to find the solutions. Then you need to have some who are able to sell the solutions. This is where we said that's more difficult. That's much more difficult.
Ron, you also mentioned the characteristic. So what's your point towards the thing that was discussed? But let's not forget the vision question and the practicality question. Maybe you can address them as well.
I think that if we distinguish leadership from dominance, Germany is going to have a dominant role to play. The question is, how well will it provide leadership with its dominant role in mobilizing collective problem solving on these collective problems? And I think that the problems, the latitude of a government is determined abroad is determined by the politics at home. So the answer, I think, to the first question, and it ties into the other two, is if the same virtue of honesty and discipline is still very difficult when a politician is looking for votes and is standing before a group of people and saying, vote for me, and what I have to tell you is disappointing. Vote for me because at least it's honest. Whereas my competitor, who also wants your vote, is giving you a happier message, but it's not, So who does the voter vote for? The marketplace in politics pushes politicians to keep the polity, the public, at a immature or two-dimensional frame of mind, because it's politically dangerous to go to your people and say, we're going to need to, for a Greek politician, here's all the pain we're going to need to absorb, or for a German politician to say, this is not just a problem in Greeks being lazy. And those of you who are saying that, it's not an accurate diagnosis. It's a very incomplete diagnosis. It's a very small part of the problem. And the problem is more, and for the politician to go home and really educate people and engage the people. Because if the polity is immature, then it's going to give you very constricted options. You're not going to have many options to play with then in using the dominant role you have to provide real leadership abroad. You'll have a much smaller hand of cards to work with. So ultimately, I think the foreign policy or the international leadership is contingent on politicians developing the skill to go home to people and explain to people why short-term pain is an investment in medium and long-term benefit. And that, again, is a very difficult political sell. And part of our job, I think, is to help people in business. It's a hard sell in business, too, if you're the authority and you got to tell the board of directors or investors that it's going to take 3 quarters and not 1. But that is, I think, reduces maybe too far the core of the leadership problem. It's never hard to give out good news. Leadership would be an easy task if it were all about giving out good news. Leadership's a tough task when you're giving out bad news. And when you're giving out bad news that explains to people why it's necessary to absorb that bad news and why their thinking about things needs to be enriched and more complex grasp of the world. So that's part of our job, but I think it's part of all of our job in talking with friends and relatives and in the articles we write and in the businesses we manage is to engage people to move away from two-dimensional stereotypes about the world that doesn't really help them then see what their role might be in the larger collective enterprise.
But from a content standpoint, I think, you know, if we go to the bad news that at the moment, you know, Merkel has to give to the various countries that she's engaging in, to the positive vision that she could give, I think that positive vision is
helps hold the bad news.
would help a lot. And the positive vision would be to engage the rest of Europe in the environmental revolution that Germany is leading into. And in the whole narrative that Merkel is using, or also, you know, the other politicians, that doesn't play any game. Why? Because there is a very clear split. You know, the environmental revolution is basically driven by business, as we also heard. I mean, that's business which is driving, and the economic discipline thing is managed and communicated by politics. And I think it would be much better to have a combined message and involve actively the rest of Europe in this, you know, in the environmental renovation of, and I think that could be one of the narrative that maybe, you know, that maybe the politicians could embrace more.
I think we should trust more to have trust to our citizens.
Yes.
Mrs. Merkel won his first election by saying uncomfortable truths in a political, economic crisis. And now they always showing, now always looking for re-election.
Right.
But the people want to have authentic leaders.
Right.
And by this, the parrots growing up. What's this party? What's this? What is? They want to have leaders, authentic. And the Green Party starts at the same level. They accepted that there's an uncomfortable situation. I think if everyone, and we must more have trust in our citizens, that they will accept this.
Right.
And if we we have a lot of examples. Václav Havel divided his country peacefully. This was a really great success. He did it make it uncomfortable, but he did it. And this, I think, we must have more trust and not follow all media, what they are saying, the tableaus. And sorry.
And when Papandreou suggested a referendum, the whole philosophy behind that was, if you give us 2 months to persuade the public and to get the public to realize that this is the only choice for them to make, we have to trust the citizens that they will finally, through the process of engagement, you know, sanction and support these very difficult measures.
Yes, and his colleagues did not trust him that he would be able to do it.
Exactly.
That's why they said, stop it.
And Europe has a checkered history with referenda, of course.
Of course, I understand.
Tyson, do you want to add something?
I would just say on the vision point, and you know, as an American who's also a political junkie, I mean, we're always looking for the vision, and sometimes we're sorely disappointed in what we see in Europe. But I will say this: I mean, following the crisis for the past 2 years, I was pretty, I wouldn't say despondent, but disappointed in the lack of vision in Merkel's leadership until recently. She has started to show her cards for a vision of what Europe can be. And what it basically is today is a partially completed social contract among all these countries and among its citizens. She's trying to fill in the gaps by creating a common political culture at some point. And that might include a directly elected commission president. And maybe by creating that, we'll get this common sense of responsibility because everybody will belong to the same polity.
Thank you very much. We haven't solved every problem.
Most.
But I think what Karl Kaiser said in the beginning, this is a start to a discussion on the redefining the role of Germany and German leadership, and the question whether there's a German angst of leadership or angst of German leadership. I'd encourage you to go on with the discussion during the conference furthermore. I would love to thank Antonella and the gentlemen on the podium for their experiences that they're sharing with us, especially the keynote speaker who are with us. Thank you for joining us for the discussion, and thank you for being at that conference. Thanks.
Ich habe sie nie persönlich